This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi to formally meet for the first time in 5 years, right after China and India reached a resolution on a long-standing border dispute. Perfectly normal, Beijing says, following the passage of its aircraft carrier through the sensitive Taiwan Strait, days after conducting a large-scale air and sea drill around the island. A North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, pushes for stronger nuclear deterrence, citing the, quote, ever-increasing threat from the U.S. to the country's security. And shares of Tokyo Metro skyrocket on debut, the 45% rally giving one of the world's busiest subways a valuation of $6.5 billion. Also on East Asia Tonight, the U.S. presidential election exactly 2 weeks away. Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? We ask the experts what a win by either of them could mean for East Asia. Plus, looking to lift its birth rate from the doldrums, China rolls out a nationwide survey to find what's behind people's fear of having children. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have discussed the war in Ukraine with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the BRICS summit in Kazan. Moscow says it welcomes peace initiatives on Ukraine by China and Brazil and touts the creation of a new multipolar world order at the gathering. It is the biggest diplomatic forum since the war began. Mr. Putin says more than 30 countries have expressed a desire to join BRICS, a bloc that is being positioned as a counterweight to the Western-led world order. In focus right now is the upcoming meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It is their first since 2020, when clashes erupted along their disputed Himalayan border. Both sides reached a resolution on the issue yesterday, ending a 4-year military standoff. While no details have been revealed about the disengagement, China says it is in close communication with India on that very issue. Ishan Garg joins us live from New Delhi with more. Ishan, first, tell us what can we expect from this meeting between Mr. Xi and Mr. Modi?
Well, because it's a bilateral meeting and a bilateral meeting that is coming after 5 years, the issues that are likely to be at the top of the agenda are going to be ones pertaining to the border standoff. Now, in the past few days and weeks, we have seen some progress being made by both sides, and finally a communique coming from the Indian Ministry of External Affairs earlier this week saying that the two sides have reached an agreement on some of the patrolling issues. So it's likely that some of those conversations are likely to be taken forward, because many of the security analysts have said that though this is progress that is much welcome, there are a lot of other contested areas between India and China, particularly along the Himalayan border, which is thousands of kilometers long and often very poorly demarcated. So that's going to be at the top of the agenda most likely. And it also assumes significance because though Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping have met multiple times in the past 5 years, this is the first proper bilateral meeting between the two leaders. But apart from that, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is also likely to figure in these conversations because though the relationship with Russia is of different nature and different magnitude between Delhi and Beijing, they are both considered close to Russia. So that's also going to be one of the points in the conversations, as in India, there are conversations about New Delhi playing a bigger role in a potential peace solution.
While we're taking the win of that breakthrough in the border dispute between China and India, challenges still remain between the two, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. There is still a very large anti-China sentiment within India because the perception among many parts of the society is that they see Beijing as an expansionist power that's encroached on Indian territory. And Indian opposition parties have also said that China has taken away some land from India, though the government has denied these claims vehemently. So that's led to a very strong anti-China sentiment within India. But things are very different from what they were in 2020 when the clashes first erupted between the two countries. Right after the clashes in 2020, we saw India banning more than 200 Chinese apps, and there was an increased scrutiny on Chinese investments in the country. But now we are seeing that imports from China have risen up once again, and the business community is saying that they want to start exporting more freely to China as well. So there is a push for the business relations, at the very least, to start to normalize once again. So there is a lot of scope for improvement in the ties between the two countries. But experts have also said that these are two countries that move like an elephant on the diplomatic front. So they're not expecting any major breakthrough to come out of this visit. But this could certainly set the stage for further fruitful conversations down the line.
All right, understand. Thank you so much. Ishan Garg reporting to us live there from New Delhi. Well, the issue of trade payments coming up between Moscow and Beijing at the summit in Kazan amid Russia's push for alternative payment solutions to skirt Western sanctions for its war on Ukraine. Russian state media RIA says President Vladimir Putin discussed financial settlements during talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping in their third face-to-face meeting this year. The two leaders say China and Russia are committed to boosting cooperation for what they call a fair world order as they seek to build on momentum from the bloc's members to provide an alternative to the so-called Western hegemony. Now, Mr. Putin called Mr. Xi his dear friend, says Moscow and Beijing will work towards creating a just world order. While the Chinese leader told his Russian counterpart that Beijing's strategic partnership with Moscow is a force of stability amid the chaos gripping the world.
当前，世界正处于百年未有之大变局，国际形势变乱交织。但我坚信，中俄世代友好的深厚情谊不会变，济世为民的大国担当不会变。
Российско-китайское сотрудничество в мировых делах выступает одним из главных стабилизирующих факторов на мировой арене. Мы намерены и далее наращивать координацию на всех многосторонних площадках в целях обеспечения глобальной безопасности и справедливого миропорядка.
China has described the passage of its aircraft carrier near Taiwan as perfectly normal after Taipei reported that the Chinese naval vessel sailed through the sensitive strait separating Taiwan from mainland China.
台湾是中国的一个省，不存在什么国防部，也不存在什么国防部长，这也不是一个外交问题。台湾是中国的领土。 中国的航母在自己的领土和领海行驶是再正常不过的事情。
The Taiwanese Defense Ministry says it first detected the Chinese aircraft carrier group overnight near Pratas Island, you see there on the map. Now, that's about 400 kilometers away from Taiwan, and that it is closely monitoring the vessel's passage through the Taiwan Strait this morning. China's Liaoning aircraft carrier participated in Beijing's large-scale military drills around the island last week, drawing condemnation from Taipei and its key ally, Washington. A blockade was among the exercises carried out, leading to a warning from Taiwan today that such a move by China would constitute an act of war. Beijing has described the drills as a stern warning to what it calls separatists seeking independence for Taiwan. Now, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has underscored the need to enhance war deterrence. He cited increasing nuclear threats from the U.S. Mr. Kim sounded the warning during a visit to what state media said were strategic missile bases. The North Korean leader says its bases should be further modernized and reinforced. He added that priority must be given to the strategic missile force, calling it an important principle of national defense. North Korea has been dialing up tensions in the run-up to the U.S. presidential election. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged allies to respond to North Korea's alleged involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine.
Корея може втручатись у війну в Європі, значить, тиску на цей режим точно недостатньо. І якщо Росія досі може робити цю війну більшою і довшою, значить, кожен у світі, хто досі не допомагає примушувати Росію до миру, насправді допомагає Путіну воювати.
Seoul's spy agency released satellite pictures in the last few days, allegedly showing the first batch of North Korean special forces arriving on Russian soil. Mr. Zelensky, citing Ukrainian intelligence, backed those claims, adding that 10,000 North Korean soldiers are preparing to join Moscow's war against Kyiv. The South Korean parliament was told today that those additional troops are expected in Russia by December, and that 3,000 are already in the country. Ukraine also released this video, purportedly showing North Korean soldiers making preparations at a Russian military base. North Korea's UN representative dismissed the intelligence as groundless rumors. The Kremlin has neither confirmed nor denied this, but defended its cooperation with Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Germany is the latest country to issue a diplomatic warning to North Korea, saying its support of Russia's war posed a threat to European security. CNA's Lim Yong-suk tells us how the troop dispatch by Pyongyang to Russia may trigger a change in Seoul's policies on the war in Ukraine.
I remember when I did an interview with the defense minister then, Shin Won-sik, who's the national security advisor now, and he did hint that, should the situation change between the war in Ukraine, that there could be a possibility that the South Korean government will have to shift its policy, but he did say then that we will have to monitor it closely and see what happens. So I think that is a possibility, because now we're talking about this war in Ukraine, which is not just involving Ukraine, Russia, and Europe, but we're talking about North Korean troops, going there. And so I do think, and experts that I've spoken to have said that it does really change the whole situation, the scenario. And so I wouldn't be surprised if South Korea take some moves to get involved in some way or another, and that could be sending weapons to Ukraine. Though until now, it's been South Korea's position that it will not directly help by sending weapons to Ukraine. It's done so in a way where it sent it to the United States, and somehow it has ended up in Ukraine. But I think that's something that South Korean government will have to closely monitor and also be very cautious in what it does, because, North Korea is there now and South and North Korea are still technically at war. There's no peace treaty that has permanently ended the Korean conflict. And in fact, we have North Korea now calling South Korea the hostile state and, threatening the Korean Peninsula with war. So I think, with all the rising concerns and escalation of tensions in the Korean Peninsula, the South Korean government will have to monitor this closely if it means sending intelligence agencies or doing what they can to get more information about what's happening in Ukraine.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, Shein launches its first branded credit card with the help of a Mexican fintech firm as it seeks to expand its reach in Latin America. Plus, the International Monetary Fund cuts China's growth forecast on worries over its languishing consumer demand and property sector debt crisis. You're watching East Asia tonight, and you're also just in time for the business news with Henry Yin, and he's got all the details from Japan's biggest IPO in 6 years. Hi, Henry.
Yes, indeed. Exciting time, isn't it, Jill? And Tokyo Metro riding high in its market debut as investors were drawn in by the potential of steady returns. Analysts say there isn't much upside to subway operators' share price because the public nature of its business makes it difficult to raise fares for more profit. But market watchers note that as long as the stock remains stable, investors would be able to reliably receive decent dividends and shareholder benefits.
Shares of Tokyo Metro, one of Japan's leading subway operators, shot up 45% in its market debut on Wednesday, following an overwhelmingly successful IPO. The offering, which raised $2.3 billion, is Japan's biggest in 6 years, drawing significant interest from investors. Trading at more than $11 in the morning, the stock was in high demand, with the IPO more than 15 times oversubscribed, signaling investor confidence in the company. The metro dates back to 1920 when it was established as the Tokyo Underground Railway Company. 7 years later, it opened Japan's first subway line, connecting areas on the north side of the city center. Priced at the top end of expectations, investors were drawn to the subway giant's household name, a 40 yen dividend forecast for the fiscal year ending March 2025, and perks like discounts at its noodle eateries. The IPO is the largest in Japan since SoftBank Group listed its telecoms unit in late 2018. Tokyo Metro's listing also comes amid a surge in Japan's IPO market, which has reached $4.9 billion in offerings so far this year. According to LSEG data, that's the highest since 2018. The Japanese government has said it will use money raised in the metro sale to repay bonds issued after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami.
Signs of improvement in Hong Kong's market activity, with the city's sports operator reporting market-beating third-quarter profits. That's as trading activity improved due to China's stimulus package and interest rate cuts by global central banks. The stock exchange logged a net profit of $405 million. That's 7% higher in the same period of last year. And revenues in the 3 months ended September rose 6% to $624 million, which is also ahead of market estimates. HKEX attributes this to rising trading and clearing fees, and CEO Bonnie Chan said the board's 9-month revenue and profit was its second best ever. And HKEX is looking to attract more trades and deals to the largest offshore listing hub for Chinese enterprises, despite weaker growth prospects for the world's second largest economy. This as companies rush to float in Hong Kong to ride the strengthening market momentum. The financial center last week recorded its busiest week for new initial public offering launches in almost 2 years, giving bankers and investors confidence that a 2-year share sale freeze could be easing. Chinese fast fashion giant Shein has launched its first branded credit card worldwide as part of its international expansion. The card's rollout was done through a partnership with Mexican fintech firm Story. And customers would be able to use the card to earn points on Shein's website with every purchase and double points on clothing orders. The push aims to draw more Mexicans to the credit market and lure shoppers to the low-cost sellers' online platforms. Shein's clothing sales reportedly slowed in the first half of this year amid weakening demand and fierce competition. As part of its plans to expand in Latin America, Shein is also looking to build a plant in Mexico and set up a distribution network in Brazil. Mexico's e-commerce market has been on the rise, with further potential for clothing sales to grow. Figures from the Mexican Online Sales Association show that clothing sales accounted for only 40% of all online purchases currently. Apple CEO Tim Cook has promised to keep investing in China during a meeting with Beijing's top technology official. Mr. Cook told Chinese officials that Apple is interested to spend more in China and to help develop its supply chain in the country. That's according to a ministry post on WeChat. This is Mr. Cook's second visit to China and comes as Apple users in the country have been increasingly vocal about their wish to see the iPhone maker bring its artificial intelligence services to Chinese customers as soon as possible. Mr. Cook reportedly told local media that Apple is working on it, but the U.S. firm still needs to complete a comprehensive regulatory process first, and Apple has yet to find a partner for its AI services in China. The tech giant has a deal with OpenAI to integrate ChatGPT in its latest phones, but OpenAI does not allow users outside of the territory it supports to access its services, which includes China. The International Monetary Fund has raised its growth forecasts for the U.S., but cut them for China, warning of risks from conflicts, trade wars, and high interest rates. The United Nations major financial agency published its latest World Economic Outlook, which estimates that global GDP will remain at 3.2% this year and next. Finance leaders have been gathering in Washington, D.C. this week for the IMF and World Bank annual meetings. Benji Haya reports.
Global growth is expected to be stable yet underwhelming. That's exactly how it's described by the International Monetary Fund, which says that GDP will fade to, quote, mediocre levels within 5 years. It's hardly the brightest of projections, yet there are reasons to be optimistic. Major economies, the United States, India, Brazil, are all facing a soft landing, according to the IMF's chief economist. In other words, inflation has cooled, but a recession has also been avoided. It looks like a global battle against inflation has largely been won, even if price pressures persist in some countries, says Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas.
The battle against inflation is almost won. After peaking at 9.4% year-on-year in the third quarter of 2022, we now project headline inflation will fall to 3.5% by the end of next year. In most countries, inflation is now hovering close to central bank targets. Now, inflation came down while the global economy remained resilient. Growth is projected to hold steady at 3.2% in 2024 and 2025.
It's a far cry from the state of affairs just a few years ago, when the world was in the midst of a crippling pandemic. Here in the US, growth is set to slow to 2.2% next year. That is still better than the central bank's forecast. However, the IMF predicts that elections could introduce a high level of uncertainty. Donald Trump, whilst not mentioned by name in the World Economic Outlook, has vowed to impose huge tariffs on imports from China if he is elected president. The IMF, meanwhile, revised China's 2024 growth rate down to 4.5% for next year, as the economy there remains burdened by property weaknesses and languishing consumer confidence. India, though, continues to post very strong numbers. 7% this year, 6.5% in 2025. Benji Haya, CNA, Washington.
SoftBank-backed British firm Arm is reportedly cancelling a licensing agreement that allows chipmaker Qualcomm to use its intellectual property to design chips. Analysts say the move could roil the smartphone and personal computer markets, as well as disrupt the finances and operations of the two companies. According to Bloomberg, Arm has issued a 60-day notice to its longtime partner. Qualcomm sells chip technology used in the majority of Android smartphones. If the cancellation takes effect, the firm may have to stop selling its products or risk facing claims for massive damages. A trial is set for December in Delaware. Qualcomm has called Arm's cancellation completely baseless and accused the British company of attempting to disrupt the legal process. And Qualcomm added that its rights under the agreement will be reaffirmed and that Arm's anti-competitive conduct will not be tolerated. The latest escalation of hostilities comes amid a legal battle between the two companies. It started when Arm sued Qualcomm in 2022 for failing to negotiate a new license after it acquired Nuvia. And Arm previously claimed that the current design planned for Microsoft's Copilot Plus laptops is a direct technical descendant of Nuvia's chip, which led it to cancel the license of these chips. And that's the latest in business. Jill, back to you.
Thank you so much, Henry. Coming up on East Asia tonight, what a win by either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris could mean for businesses and countries in East Asia. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wants stronger nuclear deterrence, citing an ever-increasing threat from the U.S. Beijing says sailing its aircraft carrier through the Taiwan Strait is perfectly normal, days after holding a large-scale air and sea drill around the island. Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi to meet for the first time in 5 years, right after they reached a deal on a long-standing border dispute. Relations between the U.S. and China have featured prominently in the lead-up to the presidential elections just 2 weeks away now. A report by Reuters says Chinese exporters have been shifting production out of China ahead of the polls in November. Now, one company is quoted as saying it is preparing to halve its China supply chain within a year, having already moved production to Vietnam, India and elsewhere. The outdoor play equipment maker is said to be worried about Donald Trump's promise to impose 60% blanket tariffs on China. Reuters says it spoke to 27 Chinese exporters who at least sell 15% of their products to the U.S. 12 of them are reportedly planning to accelerate relocation if Trump returns to the White House. For others, still fully in China, they say that they would open factories overseas if Trump raised tariffs. Although 11 companies have no plans, the report says most have expressed concern about losing U.S. market access. On the other side of the coin, producers reportedly expect higher tariffs to disrupt supply chains and further shrink Chinese profits. Such an outcome, they say, would hurt jobs and investment while raising prices for the consumers in the U.S.
Well, yes, Jill, for more, we are joined in the studio by Kurt Tong. He was formerly the U.S. Consul General to Hong Kong and Macau. Now he's managing partner at the Asia Group.
Welcome, Ambassador. Now, you know, China and the U.S. have clawed back their relations to a point that it remains fairly stable, but still tense. Leading up to the elections, give us a snapshot of where they are now.
Well, the current status has been a bit on hiatus as the U.S. is concentrated on the election, and China, I think, nervously watches awaiting the outcome and is trying to figure out what its strategy will be for dealing with either a President Harris or a President Trump. So you're correct in saying that things have stabilized for the time being, but I do think that there will be more excitement to come in 2025. The U.S. Congress is also very focused on China, and we can expect quite a lot of new policies being driven from Washington, regardless of the election outcome.
So if we were to focus on the business side of the story, so we've seen in the second quarter of this year, and a lot of investors, you know, pulling out the money from the China market. Of course, that is before China's stimulus package kicked in. But a lot of people citing reasons like rising tensions with the West, including the US and Western countries. And we are seeing that both the Democrats and Republicans are threatening an even tighter rein on Beijing. So won't the new government, no matter what color, spell a more difficult time for the US and the global economy?
I think that's right. The direction of policy change and policy trend in Washington, regardless of party, is towards de-risking from the Chinese economy. And the question really is whether that extends to decoupling. And there are voices, particularly on the Republican side, that are saying that decoupling is not a bad outcome for the United States, that would be acceptable for the U.S. given its geopolitical positioning. But then there are other, cautionary voices saying, the Chinese economy is a large economy. It's important to the United States to remain engaged with China economically, and that debate will continue. I do think there are specific policy differences between Harris and Trump that will really set the stage for the dialogue between the U.S. and China next year.
You know, when you look at how the race is playing out in the Chinese media, what are you seeing? Is the U.S. getting much attention on media, social media as well right now?
I think certainly there's the U.S. election is garnering close attention worldwide, and I would that included in China. I find that speaking with Chinese opinion leaders, you get a bit of a divided opinion about how they would like the election to go and what they think the degree of impact will be. Because in the popular perception, the choice between two poisons, right? Yes. And But then once one gets into the specifics, you hear voices saying, well, perhaps if it's Mr. Trump, then we'll get back into a negotiation mode that has been absent in the Biden administration. But then there are others saying, well, with Harris, we have a more predictable U.S. leader, and it's easier for us to shape our policies around that predictability.
So, Ambassador, in the Trump era, we've been seeing like keywords like trade war, and then perhaps in the Biden administration, that period, we've been seeing words like chip war or something close to that. So, what sectors are preparing for an impact from Washington's tighter policy, do you think, in the future? Perhaps EV sector, continue to be in the tech sector, or rare earth? What's your view?
Well, I think certainly any high technology sector that is considered militarily relevant, and the U.S. is certainly taking a very broad definition of that, is a sector that needs to expect that the U.S. will continue to put pressure on them to de-risk from China, to decouple from China, depending upon your term of art. And then radiating outward from that, there are other issues around data privacy, cross-border data flows, and data protection. And then there are issues around perceived overcapacity and the perception from the U.S. side that China is seeking to export its way out of its current economic doldrums, and that the U.S. needs to take a response against those. And that's reflected, for example, in the Biden administration's tariffs on steel and electric vehicles. So there's really quite a broad range of sectors now that are under policy risk, but many of them are in the high-tech area.
Both Trump and Harris administrations say they're going to be tough on China. But at least one Chinese expert that we spoke to here on East Asia Tonight says he believes China prefers one candidate over the other, as you were alluding to. Let's have a listen.
Okay.
To me, China has a clear preference now because of the personality of the candidates. Okay, Trump is very different from a normal Republican candidate. Okay, he's quite emotional, quite unpredictable, and also as his first administration performance demonstrates, he can be quite unethical, okay, in terms of pursuing his goals.
Unethical, unpredictable, and as you said just now, it's the choice of two poisons. Is one poison, in your opinion, less lethal than another?
Well, I tend to trend towards perhaps similar to Professor Jia, thinking that stability is in itself a value. When you consider the potential geopolitical flashpoints around the region, and the fact that the U.S. and China are confronting each other in those areas, the pursuit of stability is a public good. And so that seems to be on offer more from candidate Harris than candidate Trump. I temper that with the possibility that a negotiations-oriented Trump could, at the end of the day, lead to an improved situation by actually having dialogue with China and reaching some understandings. Whether that's possible or not, I think is a complex picture. It depends on China's attitude towards the United States. It depends also on other things like what happens between the United States and Russia. And that will all come together in the next year or so, and we'll see how it plays out.
Okay.
And Ambassador, you have said that the main difference between the two candidates in the area of trade policy as well as protectionism. So can you perhaps elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes. Well, I think in the area of technology denial, the U.S. trying to prevent China from catching up technologically, there's mostly similarity between Harris and Trump. The biggest difference is in the use of tariffs. So Harris is advocating a strategic or surgical use of tariffs aimed at specific sectors where the U.S. wants to prevent China from penetrating U.S. markets. President Trump, former President Trump, is advocating a broad tariff, even a global tariff, as a way to raise revenue, bring U.S. Foreign trade accounts into balance, and particularly punish, if you will, the perceived unfairness in trade relations with other countries. And those three things come together on China. So my personal expectation is that President Trump, if elected, will not do a global tariff because it's too complicated. There will be too much opposition, including within the United States, but that he will do high tariffs on China. Whether he'll do 60% across the board or not, I don't know. But I would expect a significant tariff increase, which will have very broad disruptions, reflected in what you were reporting earlier, on supply chains in this region.
I want to ask you a little on geopolitics, because the U.S. really has its plate full at the moment in the global arena with issues such as Ukraine, the Middle East, stretching Washington thin. Now, it has to prioritize whoever comes into the White House. Can the upcoming administration not afford to prioritize Asia?
I think that either administration under either leadership will prioritize Asia. And there's two ways of prioritizing. There's the headline chasing activity of the president and the Secretary of State, where they're traveling and who they're meeting with, trying to solve various crises. And then there's the institutionalized engagement that comes from dedicating resources to a region. And I think that over time, through the course of the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, the U.S. has devoted more attention and resources to the Asian region. Primarily on the strategic side, less so on the economic policy side, where the U.S. has actually pulled back. But I do think that engagement will continue regardless of the headlines and where the crisis is. But it is a relevant factor in terms of presidential travel, in terms of presidential dedication of personal time. And the U.S.-China relationship does need, and relationships with ASEAN as well, need personal attention from the president. So it's a problem. But I don't think it's as simple as not being able, as doing just one or the other. I do think there's an ability in the United States to walk and chew gum at the same time, as we say in the U.S.
Ambassador, a quick question before we go. So what are the business implications of the upcoming presidential election for companies operating here in East Asia? So what are you telling your clients?
Well, I'm asking them to mainly focus on supply chain disruption as a possible short-term effect of increased tariffs. And then also to be thinking forward over the long term, assuming that the technology denial, technology de-risking trend is something that's going to continue, to think through their strategies to accommodate that so that they're not getting caught on one side or the other, but still able to find profitable ventures throughout the region. There are plenty of sectors where this is not a risk, but there are also quite a few in the more regulated sectors where that is spreading, and I think it's increasing as a phenomenon.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for now. Not long to go, 2 weeks to the day, and we might have you back after. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I've been speaking there with Kurt Tong. He was formerly the U.S. Consul General to Hong Kong and Macau. Now he is managing partner at the Asia Group. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China launches a survey to find out what's behind Chinese people's fear of having children. Warm welcome back to East Asia tonight. China is rolling out a survey across the country to find out what's behind people's fear of having children. Now, the survey is the latest in China's population story, from a historic one-child policy that was in the late 70s to now encouraging people to have 3. Local and international media reports say the survey is asking 30,000 people about what they think of marriage and of childbirth, and that's to shed light on declining birth rates. The research arm of the National Health Commission is leading the study, which kicked off this month. China's population shrank for a second consecutive year in 2023. Now, the first drop in 2022 was the first time China saw numbers fall in more than 60 years to 1.4 billion people. China scrapped its One China policy in 2016. After 35 years, families were allowed to have 2 and in 2021, 3 children, with subsidies for those who have a second or third child. Observers say the country needs to do more than offer financial incentives, and that includes relieving domestic pressures on women and making flexible work possible. Well, for more on China's population woes, we have with us Dr. Ye Liu from King's College London. Dr. Liu, now, Chinese people are not having kids as much as the government would like them to. Now, the phrase that has been quoted in local media reports is this, quote, "I don't want to, I don't dare to have children." What's behind this?
So this fear in Chinese, 生育恐惧, comes in many different forms. So the first is economic concern. Having a child is a huge financial commitment to individual families. So this financial commitment will be on top of existing economic pressure, such as mortgage, inflation, and uncertain labor market. The second fear, particularly for women, is opportunity cost. In China, it's still very difficult to have this balance act between career and family. So the women, from my research, women think having additional children will set back their career. So they often have to make a choice between career and family. The third fear is translated into distrust in the institutions, in the market, and in the government in terms of safeguarding their children's welfare and well-being. China has been having issues such as poisonous milk formula, unsafe vaccines, unsafe nappies, toys, and child abuse cases in nurseries. And all this distrust and every single fabric of trust been broken since China's privatization, marketization. So all these factors contributing to people's reluctance of having more children.
I understand. Now, this isn't the first time China is executing a large-scale survey to tackle the baby problem. There was one done a couple of years ago. What were the significant findings in that survey?
So the China House Commission conducted a survey in 2021, and the main finding is very simple. People don't want to have more children. And so the desired number of children is around 1.54. And particularly this trend is more pronounced among young women. So in China, we have terms of 90后 or 00后, those born after 1990s, and those born after 2000, they are very reluctant to have more than one child.
Okay, now, since then, the government has actually tried to encourage couples to have children through mainly financial subsidies, fertility policies. Any notable policies that China has introduced since then?
So there are a few notable policy changes. The first is called double reduction policy, which extends school hours to allow working parents to work longer, and also to put a limit on homework and private tutoring. So this is kind of easing the individual families' the care burden, particularly for mothers. And the second policy related to the maternity leaves, around 25 provinces all extended the maternity leave policies from the prior 98 days to the current 122 to 188 days of maternity leave, depending on the policy or region. There are also a range of policy incentives, investment in providing and building childcare facilities at the local and the community level.
So they've tackled it through financial incentives, infrastructure incentives, even trying to provide more time. But still, the birth rates haven't picked up satisfactorily. Why do you think that is?
So the first of all, 2 reasons in the current approach. The first, the policy making is still very kind of masculine code loaded. So in short, a man making policies for women. So if we look at this kind of a reward and punishment, logic, did not really address, trust deficit and did not really address women's concerns. And to improve the current policy making, the government should be more proactive in terms of regulating childcare facilities across China, to improve training for childcare workers across China, and also, more importantly, to introduce more legislations that would root out, workplace, discriminations, misogynist practice, which prevented women from working.
You raised a really important issue a while earlier, and that was a distrust of the government, which stemmed from issues like not being able to trust the milk, the quality of milk that you're having, the quality of the vaccinations that you're putting into children. This is a little harder to solve, isn't it? What will it take for that hump to be overcome?
So the government need to provide a much more kind of coordinated approach, for instance, to reestablish, to introduce much more rigorous regulations in private business. And this, rigorous regulation should also apply to childcare facilities in terms of their regulations, in terms of their student-staff ratio, and it's not reinventing the wheel. China has very kind of a long tradition of teacher training programs, so they can really building this kind of a training and childcare provision through their existing education system. So I think that one of the problems is a lack of a policy coordination.
A final question to you. The issue, if we look at it on a larger picture, is touching countries like Japan and even South Korea, not just China. What do you feel might be the common denominator behind the low birth rates across East Asia?
So I think might be two commonalities across East Asian societies. The first is entrenched patriarchal values, with traditional expectations of men to be breadwinners and women to be the main caregivers. However, reality is different. So in these three East Asian countries, women had more education than before, and more education than their parents' generations. And in South Korea and China, the female participation rate in higher education actually, much higher than their male counterparts. So when women have more education and more likely to have financial independence, they still face this reality where they expected to be mothers, to be caregivers. So I think this is a, traditional patriarchal value, traditional patriarchal kind of gender relations. And another thing, particularly in China and South Korea, there was huge pushback against gender egalitarian policies. So there were pushback against the feminism, pushback against, equal opportunity legislations in South Korea. So we have a really uncomfortable question to ask. How can we, address this, persistent attitude?
It's the sooner the conversation starts, the better. We want to really thank you, Dr. Ye Lui from King's College London. It's been fascinating. Thank you. That's it for East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, and visit us on X. Bye-bye.